So let's talk about books and what I read in February. I'll be honest, a little less than usual, but let's dive into what I read, which includes memoirs, fiction, manga, and a book about brain science in kids. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 247 with me, Tara Swiger. Each week we usually talk about what it's like to have a small creative business and how you can get through it and that you're not so alone with whatever you're going through. Last week we talked about not being so hard on yourself. This week I'm doing something I do every month, which is share with you what I'm reading this month. So you guys have told me you like to hear about these book posts, what I'm reading. Sometimes it's business related. Recently it hasn't been as business related because I have a toddler living with me. I'm a foster mom of a 2-year-old, and so I've been reading fiction because it's what I can focus on. So this month we'll get right into it. Let me tell you first, I've read less than usual. Not even the toddler's fault, except that I go to bed way earlier now. So my reading time at night has been severely curtailed by me falling asleep at 8:30 or 9 each night. Also, I got started with a novel that I didn't love, and instead of putting it down and starting another one, which is usually my way of getting through books fast, is I just put aside books I don't like. I kept sticking with it and then falling asleep like 2 or 3 pages into it each night. So that really slowed me down. Also, I record this a couple days before the end of the month, and I'll probably finish a couple more books before the end of the month, but I'll be sure to talk about them next month in March's reading roundup. So we'll get right into it with all those warnings. So one of the best books I read this month was Heartberries by Marie-Therese Millot. It's a memoir. She's a Native American author, and it is a memoir of her experience after having a mental health breakdown. So it starts, and she is in a inpatient mental health program. She's diagnosed with bipolar, and it is more than I thought. I thought that it was about mental health and kind of her journey through navigating that, but it's more about a memoir of a relationship and kind of how her episodes affect the relationship and what happens with that relationship. It's more about her love life than I anticipated. It's extremely beautifully written. It's a gorgeous memoir. It's super interesting. She writes some letters to her paramour from inside the inpatient program while she's still not quite well. And it's really interesting to see inside someone's thought process while they're going through that process, that healing process. So it's super beautiful. Next, on like a totally different page, is a new book that came out, The Anonymous Girl by Greer Hendricks. You might remember her from, I read The Wife Between Us a couple months ago. And The Anonymous Girl is like a suspense thriller based on this girl who goes in to do this study at this college for this like psychology professor that then gets weird. She kind of gets sucked into what the professor is saying is a study, but is actually just a massive manipulation of this girl. And it's suspenseful. You don't know how it's going to end, and then it ends, and you're like, whoa. Kind of like The Wife Between Us. So if you like suspense thrillers, The Anonymous Girl is super fun. I read it super quick. So totally different is Princess Jellyfish, which is a manga by Akiko Higashimura. It is a super well-known manga. It's a good starting place for getting into manga. I'll be honest, I read a lot of comics and graphic memoirs, but I hadn't read any manga yet, but I was inspired to by the Read Harder Challenge. So the Read Harder is a yearly challenge that is on the Book Riot site, which is just a book site I really love. I'll link it up in the show notes and over at my site. You can find it at taraswiger.com/podcast247. And I'll link up the Read Harder Challenge, but it's basically 24 different challenges to read outside of what you usually read. I talked about it at the beginning of 2018. I read, I think, almost all the books in the challenge in 2018. I didn't track it very well. This year, I printed out a checklist to put in my Happy Planner so I can check off and mark what books I read for each challenge. one of the challenges was just read a manga. So I read Princess Jellyfish. The Book Riot site has a bunch of suggestions if you're new to the format. It is translated from the Japanese, and you actually read it from, in America, what we would say is back to front. And that was tricky to get used to, turning the pages the opposite way. And also you read it from right to left. So it's in English, but it's written like there'll be a sentence and then a sentence and then a sentence. And because it's in dialogue bubbles. Oh, for those of you listening on the audio podcast, you don't know that I'm showing like there's something on the right. The first sentence will be in the right in a dialogue bubble. And then you read the dialogue bubble in the left and you work across the page from right to left. So in order for the art to stay the same and to make sense sequentially, they had to keep it in the Japanese format. So you read from right to left across the page and then down. And that, the first few pages is like your brain doesn't want to do it. But then once you get in the habit of it, it kind of clicks in. What I found, because I finished it as it was getting late, and of course late for me now means like 9 or 10, is I was having a harder and harder time keeping my brain going in the right direction, because when I would get tired, it would want to flip the pages the direction it's used to. But once you get into it, it clicks, and it's such a cute story, and it's really sweet. It follows a nerdy, kind of obsessed girl who's an illustrator, and she's obsessed with jellyfish, and she lives in this home with a bunch of other young women who are kind of nerds for different topics like trains and anime, and they're kind of social outcasts, and she makes friends with a very glamorous person and enters more into the world and has adventures. It's sweet. I read the first volume. I think there's a second volume I'm going to get from my library soon. It was a great first experience with manga. Like, I loved the story. It was super fun, kept me reading, and it's just like joyful is basically how I would describe it. Very sweet, very pretty art. So the other book I've been reading, I haven't quite finished it yet, but I'll probably finish it by the end of the month, is The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel. So it is, the subtitle is 12 Revolutionary Strategies to Nurture Your Child's Developing Mind. This book is recommended so often in the adoptive and foster parenting world. It's really about the brain science of how your kid's brain is working and why they're doing what they're doing. So it's not really about parenting as much as it is about psychology and understanding what's going on. And then they do give you strategies. So kind of the premise is that, you know, you have your right brain and your left brain, and one is more logical and linear and makes logical decisions, and the right brain is more creative and expressive. And what can often happen with any of us is we will get stuck on one side of the brain and not integrate both sides together to make reasoned, thought out, but also emotionally sound decisions. So if you're too much the left side of your brain when you're making a decision or having a conversation, you might be like rigid and really stick to the rules. For those of you with kids that are like 6, 7, 8, they might be like, no, but that's not the rule. We can't do it that way. You said this is the rule. We have to do it this way. That's very left brain. Right brain is tantruming, screaming, just emotion, like big feelings, and helping your kid integrate both of them, helping yourself integrate both of them, helps you be more reasoned, but also more in touch with like what you need and going with the flow. And then the other kind of way that our brain is divided is the upper brain, which is more logic and self-control, and the lower brain, which is more like what you hear called the reptilian brain, which is food, shelter, concerned with your safety and well-being. And the reason why this book is so popular with kids who have gone through trauma is they often haven't even had the ability to develop the upper brain because they've been living in a space of needing to just stay safe. And so when you're reacting from that place, you get tantrums, and the lower brain helps you put a lid on it, stay calm. And yeah, so the book is about strategies of understanding that. Once you understand that, it helps you deal with it a little better, with a little more empathy, with a little less freaking out. They also have, I was going to show you if you're watching the video. If you're not watching the video, you can head over to my site and see the video. They also have little kind of comics that explain the different strategies. So instead of like denying your kid's feeling in this comic, it's showing that you name it and tame it. You explain like, oh, it looks like you're feeling upset about this. That helps the kid feel acknowledged and that they can move on from it. You can see. And they say these, their kid explanations are kind of for kids that are over 7 or 8, but you can obviously scale it down to whatever age your kid is or scale it up. And then at the end of the chapter, so there's the explanation for kids, they call whole brain kids, so that you can help explain what you're learning to your kid that will help them develop those skills. And then there's also an integrating ourselves part, because as you integrate this knowledge and ability to make decisions from an integrated brain, the more you can help your kids integrate your brain. And what's crazy is that happens on like a knowledge level and a thinking level and a left brain level of you being able to explain it, but it also happens on the level of you being an example and a modeling the behavior of integrating your brain and making decisions and calming down when you feel upset. But then there's a third level, and that's the hormone level. When you get better at integrating your brain and calming your brain down, you release different hormones in your own body, and that actually affects your body chemistry, which affects your kids' body chemistry, because the calming down in your own body actually affects their body chemistry. When you're around somebody that's tense and tight and angry, it releases more cortisol and stress hormones in your kid's body. When you're with somebody who's chill and relaxed, it lets you deepen your breathing and release more serotonin and calming down hormones in your body. Isn't that amazing? So that's how we can affect each other with our own, like using our brain and integrating this on a physical level. I think that's super cool. So super sciencey, but breaks it down into really understandable language. That's The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel, who is an MD. So that is what I have been reading this month. I always love recommendations. Please come over on Instagram, and I'm at Tara Swiger. Comment on my most recent post or share on your own stories. Take a screenshot of this episode, say that you're listening, recommend what you're reading, take a shot of the book you're reading, and be sure you tag me. I'm at Tara Swiger, plus add the hashtag explore your enthusiasm to share what you're reading with the whole community. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a whole month full of good books.